Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, January 20th. U.S. President Donald Trump says he is 100% committed to imposing tariffs on 8 countries as tensions rise over his push to take control of Greenland. In a brief phone interview with NBC News on Monday, Trump says he plans to follow through on the tariff threats, though he declined to say whether the United States would ever try to seize Greenland by force. When speaking to reporters, the Danish foreign minister reiterated that Trump will not receive Greenland by putting pressure on Europe.
I also made it very clear that we are open for this kind of discussion. We are pragmatic, cold-blooded Scandinavian people with a warm heart. But it is not easy when we wake up every morning to new threats. Please convey that message to the president. And therefore, for a second, I thought, we have managed not to solve the problem, but to find a pathway forward. It was disrupted by the statement from the president, and that's a reality of life. And that's why it's so important that all our allies in the NATO alliance and the European Union stand up for these principles to show the American president you have a desire, you have a vision, you have a request, but you will never be able to achieve that by putting pressure on us. That signal is of crucial importance in order to, I would say, to push the Americans back into the meeting room as we agreed last week.
Mock MAGA hats are becoming a symbol of protest in Denmark as opposition grows to U.S. President Trump's renewed rhetoric about seizing Greenland. Demand for the red caps, which say "Make America Go Away," has sold out and is prompting one store in Copenhagen to print hundreds more.
He's just arrogant and a very big bully. He does not care of anything. His way of saying things are just so specific and so disrespectful and hateful that it's just hurting everybody around him.
I want to show my support to Greenland and to also show that I don't like the president.
Many people is coming and look for the cap.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the European Union shares U.S. concerns about security in the Arctic, but it warns there will be consequences if President Donald Trump moves ahead with new tariffs tied to the dispute over Greenland. Speaking today at the World Economic Forum in Davos, von der Leyen said any EU response would be unflinching and united. She cautioned that escalating trade tensions could send relations between the U.S. and its European allies into a downward spiral, ultimately benefiting their shared adversaries.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've spoken a lot today about European independence, on partnerships, on prosperity and security. So I would like to conclude with Greenland. An issue which cuts to the heart of all 3 of these imperatives. When it comes to the security of the Arctic region, Europe is fully committed. And we share the objectives of the United States in this regard. For instance, our EU member, Finland, one of the newest NATO members, is selling its first icebreakers to the United States. And this shows that we have the capability right here in the ice, so to speak. It shows that our northern NATO members have Arctic-ready forces right now. And above all, that Arctic security can only be achieved together. And this is why the proposed additional tariffs are a mistake, especially between long-standing allies. The European Union and the United States have agreed to a trade deal last July. And in politics, as in business, a deal is a deal. And when friends shake hands, it must mean something. Ladies and gentlemen, we consider the people of the United States not just our allies, but our friends. And plunging us into a downward spiral would only aid the very adversaries we are both so committed to keeping out of the strategic landscape. So our response will be unflinching, united, and proportional.
Prime Minister Mark Carney gave a blunt assessment in Davos, saying the long-standing U.S.-led rules-based international order is over. He warned that middle powers like Canada need to adapt to avoid being pressured by powerful nations. Without naming President Trump, Carney noted that great powers are now using economic ties as tools or even weapons to achieve their goals.
We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals. And we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
French President Emmanuel Macron told the World Economic Forum that Europe must stand firm against what he called the law of the strongest, as tensions with the United States rise over Greenland. Macron said the EU must be ready to use all the tools at its disposal to defend its interests, adding that it was striking that the bloc even has to consider deploying its anti-coercion instrument against the United States.
But we do prefer respect to bullies. We do prefer science to plotism. And we do prefer rule of law to brutality. We have a place where rule of law and predictability is still the rule of the game. And my guess is that it is largely underpriced by the market. Having a place like Europe, which sometimes is too slow, for sure, and needs to be reformed, for sure, but which is predictable, loyal, and where you know that the rule of the game is just the rule of law, it's a good place.
Canada's only deep-water Arctic port could play a key role in protecting the country's sovereignty if U.S. President Donald Trump follows through on threats to take control of Greenland. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says the Port of Churchill is more than just a strategic economic asset and has been urging Ottawa to invest in its expansion, particularly as Trump ramps up tariff threats tied to Greenland.
Greenland! What is our only hope if this Greenland stuff continues? Churchill. So we're leaning into Churchill hard because, you know, I've had the great privilege of speaking to people in the armed forces over the years, and one saying that has stuck with me is that they say amateurs think about strategies, professionals think about logistics. So Canada has a lot of great plans for the future, but there is only one port and one rail line that feeds the Arctic, and that would be absolutely essential for us to maintain sovereignty in Canada's Arctic, and that is at Churchill, and that is in Manitoba. So if you're thinking whatever about Trump, if you're thinking whatever about Greenland, think Churchill. That is Canada's answer to what is going on right now. And by the way, it's Canada's answer for how do we grow our economy? How do we become less dependent on the U.S.? How do we ensure that Western Canadian resources can reach the EU, can reach Asia even more quickly if you use the Suez Canal? So we have this amazing gem in the northern part of our province, an MOU today, another step maybe towards advancing that goal. We're going to be working very closely with our cousins at the federal level to move that project forward. And I just want to encourage Manitobans and Canadians to just take stock of how it seems that each passing day, the opportunity that Churchill presents becomes more and more important.
Finance Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne says Canada will not pay the $1 billion U.S. fee tied to a permanent seat on U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed Board of Peace, which would oversee governance and reconstruction in Gaza. Champagne made the comments Tuesday after Prime Minister Mark Carney accepted a draft invitation to join the board. And U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened 200% tariffs on French wines and champagnes after his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron refused to join. Coming up, Canada's new trade deal with China is still drawing sharp criticism from Ontario Premier Doug Ford. We'll have this story and more news after the break. Canada's new trade deal with China is still drawing sharp criticism from Ontario Premier Doug Ford. He says the agreement puts what he calls foreign spy vehicles ahead of good-paying Ontario jobs and insists Chinese automakers will never set up shop in the province. Speaking at two events on Monday, Ford repeatedly took aim at Prime Minister Mark Carney's decision to lower tariffs on up to 49,000 Chinese-made electric vehicles. The move was part of a broader deal that also eases duties on Canadian canola. Ford also suggested that a lack of direct communication from Carney may have strained the relationship between the two leaders.
I think I've expressed the way I feel, that number one, true partnership is communicating with myself or other premiers if it affects their economy, and I feel it's just a terrible deal. It's a terrible deal for the auto workers that aren't in the Brampton plant, aren't in the Oshawa plant, the Ingersoll plant, and we need to build our auto sector here domestically in Ontario, not by foreign governments. They say it's 3%. It's actually, if you look at the EV sales, it's more like 33%. And we've seen this around the world, no matter if it's Germany having to close down 2 Volkswagen plants or Brazil, that they said it started at 3%, now it's 37%. I have concerns. That they're undercutting our hard-working auto workers and uniform members. They pay their people probably $6 an hour over at the auto plants in China with unfair labor practices, as we're upholding proper labor practices and making sure we build the cars with clean green steel. And I just want more communication, as anyone would. This isn't about pitting one province against the other. It's not pitting one sector versus the other. I'm happy as punch for my colleagues out west when it comes to canola oil, or our friends out in the east about the fisheries. God bless them. That's great. But don't use Ontario and the auto workers here as a pond. Everyone got something except Ontario. All we got is a massive threat of Chinese vehicles that are coming here that are going to hurt every single auto sector worker. And there's over 500,000 people within the sector that are going to be hurt over time. So we're going to focus on making sure that we produce great vehicles here. China will never, ever, and this will go on record, open up a manufacturing facility. And I'm going to tell you the reason why. To make an assembly plant profitable, you need 200,000 cars manufactured here, and that's 2 shifts going full out, producing a vehicle every minute and a half. And out of that 200,000, they're going to ship 80 to 90% of the cars down to the U.S. And I don't believe that President Trump will accept any vehicles from China being manufactured here. So to say that we're going to bring assembly here from China is just not accurate whatsoever.
The Manitoba government has launched a $1 million security enhancement fund to help community organizations and places of worship combat a rise in hate crimes and vandalism. Funding will support the installation of security infrastructure, such as cameras, alarm systems, better lighting, and to provide safety training for staff.
Now, I want to make very clear, as the Premier of this province, that when somebody commits a hate crime, they're committing a crime against all of us as Manitobans. There is no place for hatred in our society. And it's often said that anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hatred. It was pretty nasty when we saw some very ugly symbols depicting that form of hatred just a number of weeks ago. And so this is an idea that we were working on, inspired by the federal program, of course, for some time. But I think the renewed impetus came because of what we were seeing in the community through the holiday season. And so I want to say a message to the Jewish community here in Manitoba. We've got your back. And I've heard loud and clear that it's not just about the words, it's also about the action.
A 50-year-old Lethbridge, Alberta man faces sex trafficking charges after 3 girls were found in his apartment. One of the girls was as young as 14. Skye Atoya faces a wide range of charges, including unlawful confinement, sexual assault, human trafficking, and obtaining sexual services of a child. An organization in Lethbridge is trying to do its part to save those from the sex trade industry and warn parents of the dangerous signs to watch out for if their child is being trafficked. Our Western Canada Bureau Chief Hal Roberts chatted with the Executive Director of Not For Sale, Joylyn Stickle.
Joylyn, at the hospital, the 14-year-old girl said she was forcibly confined for 3 days and sexually assaulted by the homeowner and other men. She was also forced to consume drugs. Now, what makes this even more disturbing is that the alleged perpetrator was granted bail and was rearrested for breaching bail conditions shortly after.
Yeah, it's horrible what has happened out there. We're so thankful that these girls were being rescued and that it didn't go further than that. But it's tricky with the bail and with him being out on the streets again and reoffending. Yeah,
a lot of people have issues with the current catch and release that's going on right now in our justice system. Now, is enough being done by law enforcement in Alberta to combat human trafficking?
law enforcement is doing a wonderful job, I believe. But I think that this is more than just a law enforcement issue. I think it's a community issue. We need to bring awareness. We need to bring prevention as a community. We need to know what to look for out there and how to help people and work alongside law enforcement with this.
So how do you go about doing that? Do you go into schools, maybe start educating early, talk to parents?
Absolutely. Like Not For Sale has, right now, we have a curriculum that we've written, and it is in the works of being approved by Alberta Ed. And with that, we are hoping to get into schools right away and to work with this prevention program and to nip it in the bud so that people know, parents know, teachers know, kids know what to look for and what will help prevent this and, work with that.
Joylyn, let's talk about some of those warning signs I should really watch out for as a parent if my child is being sex trafficked.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to watch out for. Really, mostly in most cases, parents know their kids and they can see things that might be off. And what to look out for is changes in behavior. We see a lot of kids come with expensive things that they didn't have before, like a cell phone or some clothes. They talk about an older boyfriend or girlfriend that is just bestowing all these wonderful things on them, and that's all part of the grooming process. So if parents are watching out for that in the physical realm, but also there's so much online, and parents just need to be so aware of what their kids are on, put up safety measures. But a big thing with it is if you do see something or if something is off with your kids, keep the communication lines open. Confrontation is going to shut them down more, and communication and being able to come and talk to you about things that might be bothering them is such a beautiful thing in order to help prevent this and make a safe space for these kids to be able to know who to go to if something is off. Or if something just feels off and they need to talk to somebody, parents need to be a safe place for that.
So outside of communication, Joylyn, if a parent is really concerned and seeing a number of those red flags, what else should they do?
They should definitely talk to them. And I know that it might feel like panic if they go to authorities, but panic, it's more prevention. It's more just getting on top of things if they go to authorities, because authorities might know something already about certain situations or certain individuals, that this might just be another thing that they can watch for. But as far as things that look off, just really keep in contact with your kids. But yes, definitely there's there's a human trafficking hotline that you can talk to. They can guide you with that. If it is something that you've seen, definitely, then go to the police, go to the law enforcement and talk to them. There is alert. That is also a division of the police that they're able to connect with human trafficking issues and cases and files.
Now, the World Cup of Soccer is coming up across North America beginning June 11th, and many are concerned, Joylen, that human traffickers will be out in full force. What's the best way to combat that?
Awareness, having the community aware. These things are, this has happened over and over in these big sports things and sports events. And it's something that's that if the community is aware, if you've gone to like watching if you can talk to hotel people, if you can talk to trucking people, people in all these different industries that see an influx of fans come into these events, it's important for them to understand what to look for and to know the route to take if they see something that's off.
Joylen Stickle with the Anti-Human Trafficking Group Not For Sale based in Lethbridge, Alberta. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal. Thanks for having us.
Coming up after the break, Toronto's unregulated drug scene is getting deadlier, with potent animal tranquilizers showing up more often. I'll be sitting down with our correspondent Adam Zivo to break this down further. We'll be right back after the break. Potent animal tranquilizers are showing up more and more often in Toronto's illegal drug supply, and health experts say the consequences can be serious, even deadly. These substances, which are not approved for human use, are increasingly being found mixed into fentanyl. Karen McDonald, executive director of Toronto's drug checking service, says that means people often think they're taking fentanyl, but instead end up using a dangerous cocktail of drugs. While other unregulated substances like meth, cocaine, and psychedelics such as MDMA and ketamine remain common in the city, their supply is generally more stable, and they tend to cause fewer overdoses. Fentanyl is a different story. It's been the most common opioid in Toronto since 2017 and is driving the city's drug poisoning crisis. Its unpredictable and toxic supply has led to a sharp rise in overdoses and deaths. I'm now joined by Break the Needle host Adam Zivo for more. Adam, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I want to start with what are these animal tranquilizers and why are they showing up more frequently in fentanyl?
It's just basically an animal tranquilizer that is used predominantly in veterinary care, often for horses. So the most popular one up until recently was called xylazine, also known as Tranq, and it's mixed into illicit drugs to give a more potent effect. Because you have to keep in mind that when drug dealers are selling to customers, they're competing, right? And customers are always going to seek out the strongest high. And so if you take fentanyl, which people already have some degree of resistance to an opioid tolerance, and then you add xylazine, which adds a sedative effect, then suddenly someone's going to say, well, actually, this is the stronger stuff, and I'm going to buy it. So that's more profitable for the drug dealer, especially if you can use that to cut their supply and extend it. But at the same time, it is significantly more dangerous for the user because if they overdose, then you can't use traditional medications to reverse that overdose versus if it was just fentanyl or heroin or any other opioid.
And is that what's driving drug dealers to mix tranquilizers into fentanyl just to create a more potent batch?
Yeah, this is the essence of it. And it's not just with animal tranquilizers. Like, keep in mind that the whole reason why we have a fentanyl problem to begin with is that when people were predominantly using heroin in the mid-2010s, early 2010s, drug dealers were mixing fentanyl into their heroin to make a stronger batch. And then, of course, everyone's tolerance went up to meet that of fentanyl. So then the fentanyl dealers began to add other things like carfentanil, which are variants of fentanyl that are even more potent. And then once people became resistant to that, because their tolerance was so high, drug dealers began to mix things that are not opioids that you can't develop a resistance to, or at least not in the same way that you have with opioids, to get people even higher.
And for people who use drugs, what makes animal tranquilizers more dangerous?
So if you're on, let's say, fentanyl or heroin or any oxycodone, depending on, what kind of opioid is your opioid of choice and how high your tolerance is, and you take too much, then you can be administered a drug called naloxone. And naloxone essentially will reverse your opioid and save your life. The problem here is that naloxone is just for opioids. It's not effective against tranquilizers, against benzodiazepines, against crystal meth. It's specific for this class of drugs. And so if you are overdosing and your overdose is a combination of an opioid overdose plus taking too much tranq, well, suddenly this overdose reversal medication is not going to work, right? And let's also not forget that these drugs, they have compounding effects on each other, right? So they both depress the body, which significantly increases the risk that you just stop breathing and that you die. Now, on top of the immediate risks of overdose, there's also the risk of infection. So tranq is not meant to be used on humans, right? It is meant for horses and other animals. And so if you insert it into your body, you tend to get necrosis, which means that you have these horrifying abscesses where basically pieces of your body start to more or less fall off. Like, you have giant holes in you that are bleeding and they get infected.
Right.
And of course, that presents a risk of death as well.
Now, it's no secret that fentanyl is becoming more and more unpredictable. I mean, you've just really elaborated on that. But how does the uncertainty contribute to overdoses and deaths?
Well, I mean, like the fact is that when you buy from the illicit supply, you're never going to know what you're getting, right?
Right.
So you buy from a drug dealer off the streets. You don't know what the dose is. They could tell you that it's of this strength, but actually it's much higher. Oftentimes the drug dealers themselves don't exactly know what the dose is because they're getting it from some mysterious source as well. And the drug dealer could easily mix it with other things and not tell you, or not have a strong grasp of exactly what's in the mix of the drugs that they're selling, right? So that unpredictability does contribute to deaths. Now, some people have said that this means that we should legalize drugs because then we could regulate drugs. But that's complete nonsense, because what that would do is that would significantly increase the supply of drugs that are available to people. And when you have an increased supply, so decreased barriers to access, use increases overall. So you would see a much larger increase in drug use. And that's what we saw with the OxyContin crisis back in the 2000s, which is where this opioid epidemic all started. You had a very large supply of regulated drugs that were readily available and people got addicted. Now, on top of that, even if you had a regulated legal supply, people would still seek out ever stronger cocktails of drugs that wouldn't be legally available. Let's imagine, for example, the government provided a legal supply of fentanyl, right? Over time, people's tolerances would grow to the point where they would want to go to the black market to buy fentanyl mixed with tranq or whatever other nonsense people put in because they want to get ever stronger effects. And the legal market just cannot provide those options in any moral way. So legally, we cannot provide people with the poisons that they want to use to get high and kill themselves. And we can make a comparison here to the cannabis market. We legalized cannabis in Canada. That didn't destroy the black market. The black market persisted partially because it could offer products that were far stronger than what was legally available and often cheaper too. And that's what people drifted to. The difference between cannabis and, let's say, opioids, for example, is that black market cannabis, it might cause psychosis if you use too much of it, but it's not going to kill you in the way that black market fentanyl will.
Well, last week, BC ended their decriminalization pilot project. And a lot of people said that was good news, whereas other people were a bit upset that it had come to an end. What do you think that Canada needs to be doing if the decriminalization approach didn't work?
We need to address the underlying reasons why people use drugs, right? So we have to decrease the demand for drugs by addressing the underlying root causes of use. So whether that be, for example, poor mental health, whether that be a lack of housing. And these are very difficult issues to fix, right? How do we ensure that people are housed and that they are not wallowing in despair? But at the same time, we do know that there are interventions that help. There was a very high quality study that was done in the 2010s by Dr. Julian Summers, who has appeared on this TV network a few times, where they provided employment services and supportive housing that was mixed into regular market housing. Basically what that means, they gave people apartments in buildings where normal people lived instead of warehousing all the, formerly homeless people in one building. And they gave them a sense of meaning, and people often recovered. Not all of them, but many of them did. So that's a solution. We can talk about involuntary treatments as well.
And so you think a major treatment for drug use is simply to take care of the person that's taking the drugs, opposed to potentially just taking the drugs off the street?
Yes. So you can take drugs off the street, and that's helpful because what that does is it makes it harder to access these drugs. It makes it more expensive, and that has an impact. The availability and price of drugs does influence how people consume. In fact, we have a global decrease in overdoses all across North America, not global, just in North America, partially because there's a glut in the supply of fentanyl because China's not sending as much there. Right. So we know that supply does have an impact, but you can't control it fully by policing. So you do need to provide people with supports. You also need to create meaningful mechanisms to push people into treatment, which is what, for example, Portugal did. Portugal decriminalized drugs, but they didn't just let people do whatever they wanted. They said, if you're caught with a small volume of drugs, we're not going to put you in jail. We're going to send you to a non-criminal system where you will be punished with, say, for example, losing access to healthcare if it's appropriate, but you can skip all these punishments if you go into treatment. So you were coerced into treatment. We don't have that here.
Right. I do want to go back to tranquilizers and fentanyl being laced with that. Is there a way for drug users to know that their fentanyl is laced, or is there a process that they could put the drug through to know before taking it?
I mean, there are drug checking programs, and those are great. I mean, I'm a critic of harm reductionism in general, but I think that making drug checking services more available is not a bad thing. Because at that point, the person already has the drugs in their hand. So they may as well know what's in it. The question is, how do you scale that up?
Well, Adam, thank you so much for breaking that down for us, and thank you for the time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up after the break, we'll have more of today's top national and international headlines. Gun owners can now signal their interest in a federal buyback program that offers compensation for turning in or permanently deactivating banned firearms. After that, the Ontario Liberal Caucus has chosen John Fraser as its pick-up for interim leader, a role he has taken for the third time. And after that, hockey fans were treated for one of the rarest and most entertaining sights in the sport on Monday night, a full-blown goalie fight. We'll have that story and more of today's top national and international headlines right after the break. Forum Daily News will be back shortly. Gun owners can now signal their interest in a federal buyback program that offers compensation for turning in or permanently deactivating banned firearms. Ottawa has prohibited about 2,500 types of firearms since 2020, including the AR-15, saying they're meant for the battlefield, not civilian use. The government says compensation will be offered mainly on a first-come, first-served basis. Critics, including gun rights groups and federal conservatives, argue the program unfairly targets law-abiding owners.
Beginning on Monday, anyone who has a possession and acquisition license will be receiving either an email or letter from the National Firearms Center. It will have instructions on how you can find out if you have a prohibited firearm that is eligible for compensation and how to go about obtaining it. You have between Monday, January the 19th and March 31st of this year to complete your declaration and seek compensation. The process is straightforward. You can submit your declaration through the program's online portal or by mail. I urge you to declare as early as you can because submitting a declaration does not guarantee compensation. Declarations will be processed on a first-come, first-served basis. At the end of the declaration period in March, owners will receive confirmation of their participation and instructions on what to do next. The compensation program is voluntary, but compliance with the law is not. If you do not participate in the program, you must dispose of or permanently deactivate your prohibited firearms and devices before October 30th of this year, when the amnesty period ends. If you do not, you will be non-compliant with the law and could face criminal liability and possibly lose your firearms license. The deadlines are real. Please heed them. I know that law-abiding gun owners will want to abide by the law. I want to speak directly to the hunting community. I know that many of you are concerned that your ability to hunt will be affected. It will not be. This program applies to 2,500 assault-style firearms that are prohibited. If you have a prohibited firearm, declare it and take the money. There are over 19,000 non-restricted makes and models available for hunting and sports shooting in Canada. There is no shortage of choice for hunters. It is also only fair that you get the compensation that businesses have already received. We ran a successful compensation program for businesses last year with over 12,000 firearms collected and destroyed. Over $20 million was paid in compensation. We will be reopening the business buyback program later this winter.
A group of health services advocates are calling on Ottawa to remove barriers that prevent Indigenous communities from accessing health services, such as occupational therapy, speech-language pathology, and audiology services under Jordan's Principle and the Inuit Child First Initiative.
One core problem is that Jordan's Principle has become a catch-all because our other systems are failing. The non-insured health benefits program was meant to cover essential health services, but it does not reliably cover many occupational therapy services First Nations children need. When NIHB doesn't cover a service, families turn to Jordan's Principle. When Jordan's Principle delays, there is nowhere else to go. The need doesn't disappear. It surfaces later in emergency rooms, school disruptions, and family crises. That is how Jordan's Principle became the default rather than the safeguard. And when policy changes are made without adequate transition time, they cause exactly what Jordan's Principle was designed to prevent: service disruptions and gaps in care.
The Ontario Liberal Caucus has chosen John Fraser as its pick for interim leader, a role he would take on for the third time. The party's riding association presidents and executive council still need to formally approve the choice, but party president Catherine McGarry told members the caucus has nominated Fraser. She says details of a full leadership race will be announced by February 9th. Fraser has represented Ottawa South since 2013 and previously served as interim leader in 2018 and again after the Liberals' 2022 election loss. Our next story is one that is so bizarre it's hard to believe it's true. It involves a Canadian sex toy shop getting stern letters from the U.S. military. Our contributor David Clement has more.
Tonight, we have a quirky cross-border tale involving a Toronto sex toy shop, U.S. military personnel, and some unexpected international mail drama. The story comes from letters sent to the sex toy shop highlighting an unusual request from American defense officials. At the center of this is Bonjabon, a Toronto-based retailer specializing in adult products that I don't need to describe to you. Co-founder Grace Bennett recently revealed that her company received 2 stern letters from the U.S. Department of War, essentially the Pentagon, demanding that they cease shipping spicy toys to a U.S. naval base in Bahrain, situated in the Persian Gulf. Bennett discovered these letters tucked inside boxes of returned items and shared the bizarre encounter on Instagram in late September of 2025. The letters arrived over a 1-month span during the summer, expressing frustration over packages sent to U.S. soldiers stationed in Bahrain, where these types of adult items are strictly illegal. Now, Bonjabon has been offering worldwide shipping since 2019, but primarily serves markets in Canada, the US, South America, Europe, and Asia, explicitly avoiding direct shipments to Bahrain due to its import bans on these types of products. Bennett suspects the items were ordered by military personnel and then forwarded to the base, as her company frequently ships to US military addresses without any issue at all. However, she's also dealt with US tariffs causing delays, border holds, returns, including one instance where a package arrived appearing to be rummaged through. Now, one of the letters originating from U.S. Naval Forces Central Command Logistics Fleet in Bahrain detailed how Bahrain Customs detected the contraband during routine security screening. The note read in part, quote, "During security screening by Bahrain Customs, pornographic materials and/or devices were identified using an X-ray machine in a package addressed to you. This letter is to notify you that your parcel was returned to the sender. Please notify the sender that pornographic materials or devices are not allowed into the Kingdom of Bahrain. Bennett took the situation in stride, telling reporters that her employees found it hilarious and that the company prides itself on non-judgmental, confident shopping experiences for all customers. Rather than being deterred, she's turning the letters into office decor, planning to frame them for display in Bonjabon's Toronto and BC locations. Now, the incident sheds light on the complexities of global e-commerce, cultural differences, and military logistics, all wrapped in a package that's equal parts awkward and amusing. As online shopping continues to expand, stories like this remind us of the unexpected hurdles that can arise.
Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula is now buried under its heaviest snowfall in 60 years, with giant drifts swallowing buildings and cars, roads turned into snow tunnels, and viral videos showing locals leaping from windows into deep snow as authorities declare an emergency.
Ого! Это вот там кафе? Доброе утро! Красавчики! Тоже в парту. Опа! Ну что, зря ты лез? Он не залез. Это знаешь что?
And hockey fans were treated to one of the rarest and most entertaining sights in the sport on Monday night, a full-blown goalie fight. With about 14 minutes left in a feisty game between the Florida Panthers and the San Jose Sharks, tensions finally boiled over after a series of post-whistle shoves and scrums. And when Sharks goalie Alex Nedeljkovic got tangled up in the corner, Panthers goalie Sergei Bobrovsky decided it was time to leave the crease and handle things himself.
Penalty. Desharnais going to get called for a triple. That's going to be a call. Then Rodriguez comes in with a hit on Desharnais. And Nedeljkovic is in there. Why is Nedeljkovic in there? And here comes Bobrovsky all the way down the ice. And Bobrovsky's got the gloves up. And he's going after Nedeljkovic. We've got a goalie fight. It's Nedeljkovic and Bobrovsky. Oh, Bobrovsky doesn't take us. Wow. With the tackle, I'm not sure a whole lot of punches landed, but you don't see that every day. No, you don't.
I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.